Hello Unreal Engine games designers and developers. In today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to implement this drivable car into our desert landscape. I'm going to show you how to create the desert tire tracks and the sand spray coming from the back of the vehicle. We're going to use a couple of free assets to do this. It's going to be a lot of fun to program and to use it afterwards, so let's get straight to it. We're going to have a lot of fun creating this drivable car in the desert today, complete with the tracks and sand spray coming out of the back. To be honest, I've spent more time driving this car around than I have programming, so it's a lot of fun when you've got it up and running. So you can start with any landscape you like for this, but in an earlier tutorial I showed you how to create this desert landscape. You can see the link in the top right corner and in the description. So if you follow that tutorial, you'll end up with the desert dunes that you see in my viewport here. That's the starting point. And if you did follow that tutorial, you ended up with desert with a mannequin you can run around near sunset view. The only thing I've done since that tutorial is I added a few cliff mega scans around the perimeter of the landscape as a border. But you don't need to do that. It's a tutorial. So we're going to get rid of the mannequin in today's tutorial, and we're going to create a car that we can drive around, leave tracks in the desert and spray sand out of the back. And as I said, it's a lot of fun to drive around. Come out of play mode, and we're going to use a couple of free assets to make life easier for ourselves here. So if I go over to the Epic Games Marketplace, the first asset I'm going to use, and I also did a video on how this works. Not that you have to see that before this tutorial, but it's you go free for the month. This is October 2021, so you've got another week to grab this. There's this great asset here called Surface Trails. It allows you to displace the materials with the tracks of vehicles or other objects. And obviously we're going to use vehicle tracks today, so we're going to be using that. And if I go into my library, I'm going to show you another free asset that we're going to use today. This vehicle variety pack. So just search for vehicle variety pack. It's free for life, and it comes with a variety of vehicles which are ready to drive. And I'm going to use this this pickup truck here, which looks great in the desert. So go and grab those two assets, and I'll show you how to install them into the project. So go back to your, once you've grabbed those assets, go to your library, and we can add the vehicle variety pack directly to the project. Click Add to Project, pick the project you've just set up, and add it in there. It might take a while because it has to download 1.5 gigabytes first. I've done it before, so it's pretty quick for me. With the surface trails, you can't add it direct to a project. You've got to create a project first and then migrate it. So click that Create Project button. It'll create a project called Surface Trails. Then open that up. And select the Trail System folder, right click, Migrate. Leave it with everything selected. Click OK, and then go to your folder, your project, go to the Content folder, and select, and that will migrate over to there. So we should now find, if we go to our folder, that we've got two new folders in addition to our project folders, the Trail System and the Vehicle Variety Pack. And we can use the vehicle straight away on here because it comes with a variety of game modes you can just apply straight away. So if you just want to see what it looks like, if I go to the game mode override, you might not see this world settings panel here. I've put it in my layout, but if you go to settings, world settings, you'll get the same dialog up. So go to your world settings, and you can select BP pickup game mode, and that comes with the BP pickup truck as the default pawn. So if I go into play mode now, you can see that I've got my pickup truck, and I can drive around. Although at the moment it's not leaving any tracks or spray, but it's still perfectly usable and perfectly drivable. I mean, these are great vehicles. You know, they've got friction and drift. I'm using the mouse and keyboard. Now, one thing you might need to set up is there's various inputs for this vehicle that you may not have set up in your project. So I'll show you what you may need to set up. Let's come out of play mode. If you go into the blueprint for the pickup and open it up, we look at the event graph, you'll see that there's various inputs for moving forward, moving right, applying handbrakes, looking up, looking right. I found when I installed this and tried to compile it, some of these had errors because I didn't have an input set up. So if you need to set that up, go into your project settings, go to input, and just add the missing mapping. So I set up handbrake to be on gamepad and a left mouse button. It's up to you what you want to bind the keys to. And similarly, I was missing the look right. So look up was mouse Y and look right was mouse X. I couldn't look left and right. So again, just set these up as per these inputs and then you'll have no problem controlling the car. So pretty easy to get a vehicle into the project. But what we want to do is we want to now get tracks in the desert left by the tyres. And that's where this surface trails asset is going to come in useful. Now, something that we need to do first of all, when we set this up in the previous tutorial, I set this material up, the ripple sand, with no displacement. And we need to make sure we have the Megascan surface with displacement option so that we can add the surface trail to it. So just to check if you've got displacement already set up, if you go to your landscape, browse to the landscape material and open it up. If you go to the hierarchy and see the parent class, you see mine is set to MS default material. If yours says MS default material displacement, then that means you've already got the displacement material and you can miss the next few steps until we get the displacement material in here. But if you followed me in the last tutorial, you probably got this default material with no displacement, and we need to get the material with displacement before we can apply the surface trail to it. So let's close that down and we will go to the Megascans link. This is the important bit. Click on Enable Displacement. And that will mean that when we transfer the material in, it will come with the displacement material ready to modify. So check that box and then go to Open Quixel Bridge, and we've got our bright desert sand, so search for that. Ready to export. Just check your export settings first. Textures, surfaces. And we want to export the albedo, displacement, normal, and roughness. Those 4 textures. And find your bright desert sand and click export. So it'll export another copy of this, which we'll use instead of the original one. So it says it's been exported successfully. Let's go back to our project. And you'll see that we've got a new instance of that. So we've got our bright desert sand, and we've got this bright desert sand with a suffix of 00. So if we look at this one and open it up and look at the hierarchy, you can see that this is using MS default material displacement, which is the one we want to use. So we'll come back and we'll modify that in a second. But first of all, let's apply our new material. So with the landscape selected, currently got our material with no displacement. So go to the new folder that just got installed, go to the bright desert sand and drag that one into the material. You won't see any difference. It'll compile the shader and be available. Now the only thing is that the tiling is very small on this. If you remember from the previous tutorial, we changed the tiling. So open that material instance up and we'll just make the same changes that we did before. Let's drag this out of the main window so we can see the landscape next to it. And if you remember, we went to the tiling section and we made it 0.1, 0.1. Immediately that means the ripples are now more visible to us. And we also changed the tint a bit, if you remember, as well, to make it slightly more into the sort of reddy yellow spectrum. Just made it slightly redder sand. And that's all we need to change here at the moment, although we will come back later on and make some changes to things like tessellation, the tracks. So save that. We'll come back later on and fix some issues with displacement. Now, we've now got the material that can accept displacement. We want to apply the tracks to it. But let's see how it works by... actually, before we see how it works, we need to apply the necessary displacement to the materials. So let's give ourselves a bit more space on the world outliner. Go to your trail system, and for trails to work, for the surface trails to work, you need a Trails Manager component in your level. So drag that Trails Manager component into your level. You see it appears in the outliner here, and there are some configuration options here. Distance, whether it fades over time, and another side fade option. The distance, because we've got quite a wide landscape here, quite an open landscape, I've increased this maximum distance to about 7,000 or 8,000, just so I can see the trails further into the distance. So you might want to do the same thing there as well. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to edit the displacement material so it can receive the trails. So let us go back to our landscape. Go to our bright desert sand and open it up, and go to the hierarchy and open up the displacement material. This is the standard Megascans material with displacement. What we want to do is we want to go into this MF displacement function, material function, and we want to add in the trail displacement. And the way we do that is we go to the main explorer. We will find that trail system. You go into materials. You see there's this function called MF trails. Drag this into your displacement function, and that is effectively going to generate a mask with the trail that's been left by whatever object you're writing trails from. Later on it'll be the tyres of the vehicle. And now we need to just adjust this to create the displacement that we want. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to effectively create an elevation for the sand. So let's take this trails and apply a 1- node to it. That'll invert the mask. And you'll have seen this when I did the surface trails demo, how I went about applying this displacement. Then apply a multiply node, and we'll promote this to a parameter, calling it sand height. And we'll give this a value of 20 units. You'll see how that looks when we run around in it. And I can also put it into a group as well, so I can edit it later on. I'll put it in the same group as the other displacement parameters. Now, so what this is doing is it's taking the trails mask, it's inverting it and multiplying it by the sand height we want. What that means is everywhere there isn't a trail, we'll have sand at a height of 20, and everywhere where we have a trail, it will reduce that height down to 0. So effectively it will create holes in that sand texture. So that's almost done. What we now need to do is make sure that that height is applied on the z-axis. And so again, what we can do is we can multiply and you look for vertex normal and use vertex normal world space. Effectively, that's making sure that it's facing the same direction as the vertexes on the landscape, which are mostly pointing up, but maybe slightly sloping, so it's a more accurate way of doing things. And that is pretty much our function. for applying the trail. So let's just comment that out and call it sand trails. And we need to plug that into the displacement. Now we could plug it directly to displacement, or we could add it to displacement of the material that's already been applied, although in this particular case it's very subtle. But let's do it properly. Bring this up, the plus to do an add function, and we'll add that to the displacement that's already coming from the material, and then put it into the world displacement and save that. Okay, so now we have a material that is being displaced by the sand trails. Let's go back to our desert and let me try going into play mode. Okay, can you see how the vehicle is now sunk into the sand? Because what we've effectively done is we have raised the sand material by 20 units, but we're not writing any trails yet. So we've got a bit of the way there, but we've got a bit of work to do still. Now, a way we could test this out is we could use the mannequin that came with surface trails, which already has trails attached to the feet, and just test that out. So in order to do that, let us go to the game mode, go back to our third person game mode, and in the default pawn class, pick this example third person character. This comes with the surface trails and has trail writing from the feet. So if you go into play mode now, you'll see that my mannequin is sunken into the sand, but it's still not writing the trail to the landscape. And the reason for that is because even though it's writing a trail from this mannequin, the landscape is not receiving the trail. So let me just show you what's going on and why it's not working yet. If I look at this example third person character, to it, go to the viewport, you see it's got these trails attached to these trail components attached to the feet. They are effectively tagged with this trail receive tag. We need to put that trail receive tag onto the material which we want to write the trail to. So we haven't done that yet. So come back to the desert, go to the landscape and search in the details for tag, and add a tag, receive trail. So it matches the tag that we set in the foot of the mannequin. Hopefully now, if we go into play, it's not appearing yet. Now that might just be because we haven't compiled our material displacement shader. So see that we've got these, we changed this displacement option here. Let's go in here and make sure we save this and save the bright desert sand. Okay, still not working. So let's do a little bit of debugging. This, this is real life. This is what sometimes happens. So we're using the example third person character. Their trails are writing, so I think I put the wrong tag. So it's trail receive. If I go to the desert landscape, oh yes, I put receive trail. Okay, so trail receive. Now let's play. And now it's working. You can see that the tracks are being left behind by the mannequin. But I've noticed something here, which is that the tessellation here is very high. What I mean by that is that you're not getting much detail in the foreground. So let's change the material and adjust that. And the way we do that is let's go into the wireframe mode. You can see here the number of triangles that have been created. We want to create a lot more density here. And the way we do that is we go into our bright desert sand material. This out a bit. see it next to the wireframe. And if you go down a bit here, you'll find this displacement section. You can see that's where our sand height parameter is if we ever wanted to change that. But we've got these tessellation controls here. So if we click on the tessellation control here, and we'll up the distance to, say, 8,000. Okay? And then you can even change the multiplier if you want as well. So that's made a much denser track. You can obviously play with this. It has an effect on performance, but I found that this really didn't affect anything too much on this particular system. So we'll save that. And now if we go back to our lit mode, going to play, should have a bit more detail. Yeah, you can see now the sand tracks are much finer quality. All right, so that's good. So we've got our displacement material working on the mannequin. What we now need to do is apply the same trail writing components to our truck to get it to work. So let's go back to, let's clean up here a bit. Let's close down these functions. Leave the BP pickup. If you haven't got that open already, change your game mode to BP pickup game mode, and then you can browse to the asset and open it up there. So let's remind ourselves, we're in the pickup game mode. If we go into play, we're sunk into the sand, but we're not leaving any trails. So what we want to do next, we want to add 4 trail components, 1 on each wheel. We'll add it on one wheel first and see how it works, and then we'll add it to the other ones. This should be pretty straightforward. So go into the pickup component, go to your viewport, and what we'll do with the mesh selected, add in a trail, BP trail component. And what's easier here is to actually use the top-down views and left views to put it in place. So if we go to a top-down view here, what I can do is I can sort of drag this into the middle of the tyre. And what I need to do is make sure these parameters are set correctly. I haven't really played around with the hardness, so you can play around with that to see how that affects the way the trail's written. And trail receive seems to be the default. That's what we're going to write to so that our landscape receives it. And we'll see how that works. At the moment, it's right at the bottom of the vehicle. So let's compile that and go back to our desert and go into play mode and start driving around. So there is a track. But the thing I noticed when I had it at the bottom of the vehicle is that it sort of wrote it intermittently. Again, I'm not sure exactly why this is happening, but I figured it was to do with the Z-axis and making sure that the trail was in the right location. So the way I fixed it, coming out again, is going back to the pickup. So my trail component, I raised it up to 15 units on the Z-axis. And now I've compiled, I go into play mode. That seemed to do it. Actually, it's not done it permanently. Maybe I haven't compiled it. 15, compiled, save. Okay. Oh, interesting. It's still sometimes not writing it. Okay, well, let's come back and have a look at that in a minute. We can always adjust that later on. So let's go back to the pickup truck and let's apply this component to the other wheels as well. So what we'll do is with the trail component selected, do Control W to duplicate and drag it over to the wheel. Then we'll duplicate it again and drag this to the back wheel. And finally, one more, copy, Control W, and drag this to the other back wheel. Compile, save, go back to the desert track, go into play mode, and drive around. So yeah, it's still doing it intermittently. Okay, we'll go and play with that in a second. It seems to be writing some of the time, not consistently. Go back, try changing those sort of Z parameters. So let's select all 4 Trails components. Let's make the Z value 20, which is the same as our height. Actually, I know what it might be as well. Is the scale of the tracks. So scale is obviously how wide the tracks are. So I think when I did this before, I did raise them up, but I made the scale 2, double the scale, and I think that should solve the problem. Again, you know, real life, you have to play around until you get things working. So let's compile, save. Now go into play mode. Aha, fix the problem. So effectively it's riding consistently now from all 4 wheels. You can see getting those sort of lovely trails, and it really adds to the feeling that you're driving in a desert. The drifts just feel more realistic. So when I was setting this up, I had a lot of fun, as I said, driving around on the desert. But I thought the one bit missing from here was when you're driving in a desert, you're churning up a lot of sand behind you. So I thought a nice final touch here would be to set up a particle system that does a spray of sand out of the back of the vehicle as you're driving around. So let's finish off today's tutorial by setting that up. Come out of play mode, and what we'll do is we'll set up at the top level a new folder, effects, and in that folder I'm going to create, in the effects create menu, I'm going to create a Niagara emitter, and we'll do a new emitter from a template. Click on next, and probably best one to use as a starting point is the looping fountain spray, because we want this to loop around consistently, and we can adjust the directions this emitter here. So select fountain and click on finish and call it NE Niagara emitter, NE underscore sand spray. Okay, and double click to go in here, and you can see that we've got some fountain effects going on here. I find it's useful to switch off the orbit mode here, so it's easy to navigate around. That way you can carry on holding the right mouse button and using WASD to move around. So we want to make a few changes here because we want this coming out of the back of the vehicle. So first thing I want to do is I don't want it to be a sphere location. I don't want to add velocity in a cone either. So let's delete those. Select these and delete them. Now you're just going to end up with a load of particles going down. What we want to do is, after the initialized particle in the particle spawn, add in and type box and do box location. And here we want to make the box about the same width as the vehicle. So the parameters you want to use are 160 for the X, that's about the width vehicle, 0 on the Y because we don't want any direction on the Y-axis. We're going to put it at the end of the vehicle, and then the Z-axis just some up and down variation. So I put 50 there, and let's see if we move around here a bit. Sort of looking from the side of the vehicle. It's still just going straight down with gravity rather than going out of the back of the vehicle, but we'll fix that next with the velocity function. So click on plus on particle spawn, do velocity, do add velocity. And what we'll do here is, rather than have it sort of a fixed velocity, we'll do some randomness here. So click in this little drop down, do random range vector. And what we'll do is we'll first of all concentrate on the Y. So the Y is sort of going out from the back of the vehicle, so it's supposed to be the maximum. So let's go somewhere between 500 and 1000. So you can imagine this is the back of the vehicle, and this is all of the sand flying out the back. But you see, we want it to go up a little bit as well before gravity takes hold. So on the Z-axis, let's do that somewhere between 300, 500. Okay, so you can see that's the sand going up before gravity takes hold and pulls it down. And the final thing we want to do is we don't want it to go on the X-axis to go straight each time. We want them to sort of scatter a little bit to the left and right. So let's do a slight from minus 200, 200, and that will give it a little bit of rare variation, sort of going to side on the vehicle as well. So that's pretty much everything we need. Now, I've deliberately left this to last. This is way too bright. If you put this in your scene now, it will look like there are stars coming from the back of the vehicle instead of sand. And this is a general piece of advice with particle systems. A little goes a long way, so you don't really want to have them bright at all. You want them to blend in to the environment. So in our initialized particle, we can change the color. Click on the color here, and I'm going to make it almost black. So if you go to the hex linear, right, so I'm going to put 020100 FF, and it's almost invisible in the screen. But when you're using it in a system, you'll see that it's actually quite effective. So we've created the system here. I think we've done everything. We might come back and do a tweak in a minute, but let's apply this to our vehicle. Now, before we can apply an emitter to the vehicle, you need to put an emitter into a system. So let's come out of, let's save this, come out, and in our FX folder, right click, do FX Niagara system. Let's say it's the new system from selected emitter. Go down, scroll down and pick your emitter, plus button, finish, and we'll call this NS, sand spray. And this is what we'll apply to the actual vehicle. So let's go to the pickup truck and select your mesh, add component Niagara particle system, NS sand spray. Okay, and there it is, albeit in the wrong direction. So use hit enter first, use the E key, select it, and you press the E key, you've got the rotation widget, and rotate it round 90 degrees. Now you can see it's throwing the particles out of the back. Go back to the move widget with the W key and drag it to the back of the vehicle. Okay, and we also want to move it up slightly as well. So if you go from the top view to the left view, and you can just drag it up to the rear bumper. Looking good. Now the only thing I've remembered is that the number of particles is probably too few at the moment, so we'll go and adjust that in a second. Go back to the perspective view, just click off there, and you can see the particles coming out very faintly from this thing. They're slightly small as well. So let's do two things. Let's adjust the size and let's adjust the number of particles. So let's leave that. Actually, let's just compile it and save it. Go back to the main screen and open up our system. So we won't edit the emitter anymore. We'll edit it in the system. So open the system, go to our spawn rate, and instead of a spawn rate of 90, let's do 1000. So, and then you can see it in the screen. A lot more sand there, even at the faint color we put in. And the other thing I wanted to do was change the size. So in the initialized particle, let's just make the maximum size 15. So you get some bigger sand particles there as well. And click save. And if you go back to your pickup truck, you can see now there are many, many more particles coming out of the back. Okay, so that looks good. Let's see how it looks in the actual game. Let's go back to the desert, go into play mode. You can see facing it, sand spray coming out. And I have to say it looks pretty effective. When you're in the sunshine, you don't notice it so much. But when you're in the shadows, you do see it quite well. And maybe there's a few too many particles in there, but you can go and adjust those amount. Now, the only thing that's obviously wrong here is that you're getting these particles coming out all the time, even when I'm at a standstill. And in reality, you only want the sand spray to show when you're moving over a certain velocity. So the final thing I want to do is put some logic in so that the particle system only starts up when you're over a particular velocity. And to do that, we go back to our pickup truck, go to the event graph, and let's just find some empty space. And we need to do this on an event tick so that we're checking the velocity all the time. So right click, event tick. And what we want to do is we want to check the velocity. So the first thing we need to do is get velocity, get the velocity of the actor, which is the pickup truck. Then we want to check the forward vector length. Forward, or sorry, not forward vector length, just any vector length. Get vector length. And we need to choose a value for this. You could make it a parameter if you want. I played around with this. If you do a greater than sign, and we'll do greater than 300 units. Seem to work well for me. So we want to, if it's greater than 300, we want to switch the item on. And by the way, I've noticed that I've accidentally renamed it. So let's call the particle system sand spray. And while we're here, go down to the auto activate flag and set that off so that it doesn't switch on as soon as the car gets spawned. We want to control when it gets activated, when it doesn't get activated. Okay, so back to the logic now. Effectively, we're going to do B for a branch component and connect that to a tick. Put in our logic of is the vector length greater than 300, and now we want to activate this if it is greater than 300 and deactivate it if it isn't. So use control and put in our sand spray particle component and drag off this and type activate, and we want to activate it if this vector length is greater than 300. Also drag off here and do deactivate. We want to deactivate it if that's false, i.e. the velocity is less than 300. If we're stationary or we're moving slowly, we won't have any sand spray showing. If we're moving over 300 units, we'll activate that. And that should do the job. So let's go into play mode. Okay, there's a little burst of spray when it spawns because it's moving downwards, but there's nothing going at the moment. And as we move along, you can see that the spray is starting, and when I brake, it goes away. So that's working really well. So let's go into full screen mode, see what this looks like. And it really feels a lot of fun, especially if you look down on the vehicle in the sort of late afternoon shadows. You can see the tracks being left behind. Especially if I'm behind the vehicle, you can see those particles. See them from this angle as well. And so the only thing with this vehicle is that sometimes it'll crash. But that's for another tutorial very soon. I'll show you in the next tutorial how to get a vehicle upright. So I hope you've enjoyed today's tutorial. Tune in for the next one where I show you how to get your crash car upright. And keep safe and test negative, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.